My father opened a bright red coffin. Inside was a Qing Dynasty lady for. She wrapped herself in a coarse fabric with circular patterns, wore a pearl necklace around her neck, held a bright pearl in her mouth, and had rosy cheeks. Her body was not decayed, her face not rotten. "This must be the old Buddhist nun," my father exclaimed, his voice trembling. He was considered half a feng shui master, knowing a bit about Taoist principles. They say that the eastern tomb of the Empress Dowager was blown up by General Tan's artillery shells. Well, all the buried treasures along with her have indeed been stolen. But my former comrade in arms from the 6th Army says that after advancing into the tomb, there was no one inside the coffin. Even the ancestral spirits in the capital had heard of such grave robbers. Immediately, the Empress Dowager's coffin was moved away in the middle of the night. If it weren't for the frequent earthquakes in June, I probably wouldn't have found out. Beneath the pigsty where I had lived for many years, there was a hidden ancient tomb. My father's face lit up, pushing me forward. "Heap, quickly take the bright pearl from the Empress Dowager's mouth and leave. But if you touch the body of a woman, the yin energy will spread throughout your body, and in severe cases, you might lose your vitality." Seeing me hesitate and unable to decide, my older brother, annoyed, slapped me hard. "Hurry up and go. I'm about to take the university entrance exam. I can't afford to mess with this bad luck stuff." We were twins, but at birth, his body was healthy and intact. As for me, missing 2 fingers on my right hand, with both legs crippled, I was only fit to live in a pigsty like a wretched dog. My brother hit me so hard that blood gushed from my mouth, leaving me with a little strength to reach out and grab the Empress Dowager's jaw strap. Her face was covered in coal dust, but from a distance, her skin looked as smooth as a young woman's. But as soon as I touched her, I could feel the wrinkles beneath the dust, like the bark of an old tree, cold and scaly. My heart pounded like thunder. In panic, as I bowed my head, I didn't even notice the blood from the corner of my mouth dripping onto her lips. Perhaps because of the light from a distant candle, half light, half dark flickered, making it seem like her lips, stained red, suddenly trembled. Even breathing, I dared not breathe heavily, mainly because I was too close. I could smell a strong, foul odor emanating from the Empress Dowager's shiny black hair. "What are you lingering around for? Quickly take it out." Under my brother's incessant urging, I squeezed the jaw of the corpse as hard as I could. My heart skipped a beat. Then I tried to use the 3 fingers on my hand, missing 2 fingers to poke into her mouth. Her tongue protruded like a rubber band that had lost all elasticity, touching the palm of my hand. The cold and wet sensation made goosebumps spread all over my body. The nausea also rose from the sole of my foot to the top of my head. And in that moment, the bright pearl slipped down and got stuck in her throat. In the tomb, there was no wind. The air felt sticky, and I had sweated as if I had been bathing for a long time. 3 fingers clasped together, trying to push them inside to find the pearl. Finally, the pearl was in my hand. The next day, my father allowed me to sit at the dining table for the first time. In fact, he even asked me very politely and gently, "Heap, you're almost 18. It's time to start a family." My heart suddenly raced, feeling uneasy. Father has already calculated it. Your birth date is very compatible with the Empress Dowager's. Tomorrow, we'll have a celebration. I was silent, wondering who he wanted me to marry. Marry that old hag. My father became annoyed, crushed the cigarette in his hand, and said, "Do you understand anything? Marriage to a ghost, do you understand? The Empress Dowager is the most noble woman in the world. Meeting a ghost is an extremely lucky event, a noble destiny beyond compare." My father, as the head of the family, spoke decisively, and no one dared to disobey him. I looked to my mother for help. But if this matter is known by people in the village, will they laugh at Dai Long? Will he ever find a wife? She was indeed a good mother, thinking so thoughtfully. My older brother chuckled. "Mother, don't worry, I've built a high wall around the pigsty overnight. Who would know? Heap is disabled. How could he find a wife? Now it's even more of a benefit to him." My mother's face brightened, praising her son's cleverness. The tender and loving mother-son appearance made my heart suddenly chill. In my mother's eyes, I was only connected to others by misfortune. With troubles, she always brushed them away quickly and gently. That could be considered the intelligence of those in the lower classes, protecting themselves. Even my grandfather, living for the family, unable to move due to the loss of his legs, had to go to the district hospital regularly for medication. They could still heartlessly throw him into the deep mountains on a cold winter day. My grandfather was the only one who treated me well, so I wanted to stop them, only to be kicked by my father so hard that I broke a rib. He kicked and cursed at the same time. This disgraceful thing. What kind of karma have I created to have given birth to such a disabled person like you? If you cause any more trouble, I'll throw you away too. That night, I wore a torn groom's shirt. I was brought into the tomb by my family. My father burned red paper above with the birth dates of the couple, tied me up with wooden bars, and put me inside. You must stay with the Empress Dowager until the rooster crows at dawn to complete the ritual. My brother stood beside, smiling sinisterly, mysteriously. You can do it. From now on, you'll be the husband of the Empress Dowager. I laughed coldly. Before leaving home, my parents had clearly muttered, "The destiny of the Empress Dowager is noble. The only flaw is the excessive yin energy, suppressing the husband and son. Heap will surely encounter trouble this time, but it's because of his unfortunate fate that he was born disabled, isn't it?" My mother sighed deeply. It may sacrifice for this house, it's its blessing. The rope was very rough, very thick. I couldn't struggle out. The shoulder of the girl form leaned against me. My eyes glanced over the ear of the girl form. A pale yellow insect was slowly poking its head out, crawling out. I didn't know how long it had been. The red candles lit in the tomb suddenly flickered, and then went out. But there was no fresh breeze under the tomb, right? In the darkness, I felt a kind of horror I had never experienced before. Because something wet, clammy was touching my clothes. Like a soft, cold, ghostly hand, rubbing back and forth on my chest, constantly kneading without stopping. I was sweating all over, breathing heavily with fear. My mind also became dizzy, almost suffocating from lack of oxygen. However, as soon as it touched the pendant near my heart, that hand seemed to be burned, hastily lifted away. It was also at that moment that I woke up. When I looked down, I was almost scared out of my wits. A demonic hand with nails as long as a thumb. What I was wearing around my neck was a mystical mirror, also an heirloom left by my grandfather. Back then, when my grandfather was thrown into the mountain, I stole food every day and brought it to him. My grandfather knew his time was running out. He said to me, "My child, keep this for yourself." My grandfather used to serve under General Ton, traveling from the south to the north, visiting countless tombs. This mirror can ward off evil, no matter what happens. Don't take it off. Your grandfather remembers your filial piety well. I passed out until the next morning when I was awakened by screams. My mother was shouting my brother's name. In the room, my brother looked like a piece of wood, lying stiffly. The upper half of his body was bare, his chest completely stripped off. From a distance, it looked like a red vest that the groom usually wears. My father panicked, dragged me out of the tomb, and started beating me. "Why did you mess around with Dai Long last night instead of the Empress? What did you do?" I immediately reacted. It was the effect of the glasses my grandfather gave me. My and my brother's birthdays almost overlapped. If I couldn't do anything, that thing would definitely find him. But I dared not tell the truth. I could only cover my head with my hands, crying and begging for forgiveness. Father, keep watch outside the tomb. You know I've never been out. The urgent thing now is to save his life over there." My father, a clueless man, usually only made a few matchmakings for the deceased, never experienced anything like this. He regained his composure and went to invite a high-ranking expert for help. The person invited was a very virtuous Taoist, who immediately understood everything upon seeing it. "Old man Vung, what foolishness have you done?" he scolded angrily. My father, frightened, said, "Isn't a ghost wedding supposed to be conducted like this? I've followed the ancient books to do it. Ordinary people who want to marry must present betrothal gifts. What's the status of the Empress? Do you want to marry her to my son as a ghost wife, to bring prosperity and wealth to the family, but without a bit of betrothal gifts? Marry a monkey instead of a bride. If you want to bring the Empress home, you must marry her properly." sending dragon and phoenix invitations, presenting engagement gifts, beating gongs and drums to celebrate, a grand feast to invite relatives and friends. None of these can be missing. If not, the lives of your whole family will become offerings for the Empress. These words made my father stunned. Before, the ghost weddings in the village were at most just tying a few pieces of paper. How could there be such strict rules? Seeing the half-dead appearance of his son, my mother was heartbroken, scolding. At such an old age, still a widow, why are you still so arrogant, even when you become a ghost? My brother was hospitalized, barely clinging to life. When he came back, his body was covered with bruises, some as big as dogs' brains. After they burst, they were filled with pus. Every day he lay on the bed cursing. My mother's advice was kicked away by him. The Taoist advised my father to return the Ming Dynasty pearl. Now stopping is still in time. My father said again, when I was young, my grandfather used to tell me that during the Dunquook period, there was a family that discovered the tomb of a nobleman. They also held a ghost wedding, also entered into the family tree, and turned into a guardian spirit for their family, both protecting the family and bringing prosperity. They became wealthy in everything they did, as long as their descendants worshipped the altar and burned incense properly. They wouldn't have any problems for generations, enjoying blessings. Now our Vung family wants to change our fate against the will of heaven. Is it too risky? It seemed that saying that my brother would surpass others was fake. To achieve one's own desires is the real thing. The Taoists saw the current situation and felt it was like pouring water on a duck's head, so he advised to stop and leave, then listed a very long list, telling them to prepare for the wedding. 16 caddies of gold paper, 18 virgin palace maids, 8 caddies of paper money, a set of phoenix and dragon wedding dress, 10 sets of rosewood tables and chairs. So many. How much money does it take to buy all that? My father's face was extremely unsightly. Marrying a real daughter-in-law doesn't cost that much. The old Taoist laughed coldly. The rosewood is a wood that carries negative energy. If 100 demons come to feast, if you don't sit on rosewood chairs, then where will you sit? If you don't want to spend money, but still want to marry a ghost wife for your son, then think of a way yourself. My father immediately stopped him, saying he would prepare quickly. The guests invited to the party were just guests, not real people. Seeing that I wanted to run away, the old Taoist grabbed the collar of my shirt and pulled me back. Nico, tonight go to the ghost beach to invite the demon guests to the wedding feast. I refused. My father took out his belt and hit me. If you want to marry a wife, you have to go and invite. Do you want your father to go instead? I bowed my head, my face burning from the beating, trying to hide the hatred overflowing in my eyes. As the night fell, the ghost beach was extremely quiet. Graves were everywhere. I knelt before an old tomb. A red flag stuck on the tomb looked terrifying. In the pitch-black darkness, with only a faint, blurry light, I bowed my head in chaotic worship. Before setting off, the old Taoist specifically reminded, inviting demon guests to a wedding feast also has its own rules. You must remember these 3 rules well. If you don't invite them, it's easy, but if you don't see them off, it's difficult. First, after burning the wedding invitation, bow twice. Because you have no fate with the tomb owner, you must not bow to the 3rd thing. Second, you must return before dawn. Third, before each grave, light a stick of incense. When half of it burns, you must blow it out. If not, after the feast, the souls of the dead will not know how to return to their graves. I blew out several incense sticks, waited for a while, but still didn't see any movement. The wind outside began to howl. Only my breathing could be heard. Suddenly, there seemed to be movement under the tomb. Cold sweat poured down my back, assuming it was my own hallucination. The gloomy winds kept blowing to the point where the weeds around began to rustle. I summoned all my courage, pressed my ear against the side of the tomb to listen. From inside came muffled sounds. This time, I could hear clearly. At first, they were very small sounds, tapping a few times, clearly coming from inside the coffin. I trembled and sat down on the ground, my legs too weak to stand up. The Taoist had said that this meant success had been achieved. Following the tapping, the subsequent sounds became louder, faster. In the gusty wind, cries and thumping sounds began to intermingle. A chill ran down my spine. Without further delay, I, with trembling lips, uttered, "On the 7th day of the 7th month, Vung Ni Ko and Dip Hat Nalap establish a covenant, tying the knot of fate. With plentiful food and drink, we invite you all to celebrate." I knelt in worship in front of hundreds of graves. Only when a white streak appeared in the sky did I hurriedly run back home. Exhausted, my forehead was covered in blood, and I couldn't even hold it if I wanted to. I timidly asked my mother for some ointment, but she got angry, pressing on my wound and scolding, "You're just a little scratched, and you're asking for ointment? Look at how much your brother is suffering right now. Why couldn't it have been you who bet instead?" The disgust and resentment in her eyes made me uneasy. We're both her sons, born from her womb. Why treat us so differently? Despite my disabled right hand, it didn't hinder me from doing things. I used my left hand to practice writing, doing all the exercises that my brother scored maximum points on. On the night of the wedding, the courtyard was filled with paper sculptures. I didn't know where my father got 10 sets of rosewood tables and chairs from. On the tables were plates of paper dumplings, longevity noodles folded from paper money. As the auspicious hour arrived, the temperature suddenly dropped sharply. My mother muttered to herself, "Will the demons really come to the feast? It's still empty here." As she spoke, the paper dumplings on each table suddenly disappeared one by one. On the ground, a layer of flour had been spread beforehand, and now different-sized footprints appeared on it. Everyone held their breath, not daring to make a sound. The Taoist called out for the newcomers to enter. My father hurriedly urged me, "Nico, go and welcome the bride." With courage, I approached the sedan chair and half bowed, carrying the Empress out. Compared to when she was in the tomb, her body had softened considerably, and the stench was much stronger, her arms hanging limply over my shoulders. The Empress was noble, no need to kneel. My parents wouldn't dare to accept it either. I carried her, bowed slightly towards my parents. The act made me feel so low. When I bowed, I saw in front of me, besides my parents, there was another pair of feet. The toes were gnarled, the soles sticky. I glanced and immediately recognized them. Those were the ragged cloth shoes that my grandfather wore before he passed away. Grandfather had also been invited to return. I screamed in horror. Under the moonlight, my grandfather's face was pale, the corners of his mouth slowly curling up, laughing eerily. The old Taoist was startled, realizing that hungry ghosts were coming to the feast. Not good. Grandfather went straight to my father's neck, grabbed it tightly. My father's clothes crumpled, his chest heavily pressed, his throat only making a choking sound. Only when the Taoist threw a talisman into the air could he pull us out and return to the house. My father narrowly escaped death, lying limp on the ground, unable to get up. I was trembling with fear. "Master, why did my grandfather turn out like that?" The old Taoist was also shocked, sweating profusely. "Is that your grandfather? The angry spirits influenced by his aura are starting to cause chaos." From outside came the piercing screams of my grandfather. He spoke for a long time, crying and complaining. "My child, I'm hungry. Why did you abandon me like this, my child?" The hungry ghosts echoed his cries, rushing towards the house in waves, the wooden door constantly banging. My father knelt on the ground, begging for help. The Taoist solemnly asked, "Why did your father turn into a hungry ghost? Tell me the truth quickly. I can help you think of a solution. Everything has its limits." My mother, thinking she was clever, spoke up. "It's because he's been ill for a long time. Couldn't eat. That's why he died. His heart was as wicked as that, not even showing mercy to his own son." The Taoist sneered. "You foolish woman. Do you think anyone can turn into a hungry ghost? You're unfilial, unjust, met without kindness. If you've lived to see the light of day, it's thanks to your luck. Otherwise, I can't help you." As he left, my father became frantic, losing all composure, not daring to step out of the room even half a step. "Nico, go outside and see. You're a man, full of yang energy." Without any further explanation, he kicked me out. The gusts of ominous wind slammed into my face, as if countless cold hands were scratching me at the same time. My scalp was numb with fear. A female ghost with half a body appeared right in front of me. Her face was about to touch mine. I closed my eyes tightly, thinking I would be possessed by evil spirits. But then I heard the desperate screams of the female ghost. I opened my eyes in bewilderment. Under the moonlight, my grandfather smiled at me with his decaying face. Neat call. Grandfather came to visit you. I wasn't afraid of my grandfather. From what I could remember, my parents had abandoned me many times, in abandoned factories, filthy pigsties, deep in the mountains. Every time, it was my grandfather who secretly came to take me back. On a late winter day when I turned 10, I fell ill with pneumonia after being pushed into an ice cave by my older brother. My parents said I wouldn't survive, but my grandfather didn't say a word, ran to the neighbor's house, borrowed a 3-wheeled bike, and pedaled all day to take me to the district hospital. Nico, listen to me, we're almost there. When we encountered hills, my grandfather exerted all his strength, his back arched like a shrimp. When the wind blew against us, my grandfather's breathing sounded like a broken bell. I couldn't bear to see my grandfather like that, weakly speaking up. "Grandpa, don't go to the hospital. It's expensive." My grandfather replied, saying we had money. He dug out a piece of clean red cloth from his pocket. Inside it was a gold ring that my grandmother left behind when she passed away. He sold the ring to pay for my medical expenses. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days. The doctor said if we had been a little later, my life would have been in danger. My mother found out and got angry, making a fuss. "Obviously we have money, but you always pretend to be poor, afraid we'll be greedy for that little bit of money from you? Hiding and hoarding like that. Are you planning to save up to marry a stepmother? Useless, old man." At this point, their dissatisfaction with my grandfather grew. Even during meals, they wouldn't let him sit at the table with them. My grandfather's cloudy eyes looked at me. I waved to him. Then he went to my brother's room. He was lying on a long chair, anxiously asking, "Nico, what's going on outside? Where are Mom and Dad? Help me quickly." I didn't rush, sitting down beside the bed, saying there was nothing going on. "It's just that Grandpa came to visit us." "That's right, I invited Grandpa here." My brother's already twisted face turned even paler, frightening. "Are you insane? You said if I have a ghost wedding, all ghosts and spirits must be invited. If Grandpa isn't invited, what's the point?" That year, when my parents were working in the fields, I secretly stole the steamed buns and brought them up the mountain, hiding them from them. But my brother found out. He locked me in the warehouse. When my parents found out, they praised him for doing well. Those days, snow fell heavily. Thick snow fell for 3 days and 3 nights. Snow covered the entire mountain. By the time I found my grandfather, he had dead of hunger. His mouth was full of tree bark. His eyes stared blankly at the sky. He passed away right where we had agreed to meet. After that, my brother showed me his new shoes. Mom said, if I eat one less bite of food, there's enough money to buy me new shoes. A new pair of shoes? What a reason! Do you know that hungry ghosts are all those who ed unjustly? Even the king of hell won't take them in. I was determined to give my grandfather a home. Under the horrified and terrified gaze of my brother, I stuck half-burned incense on his bed. "You are the honored grandson. It's time for you to pay respects to your grandfather."